CJ and I met in kindergarten. We were the kids everyone knew as inseparable, always together, always into something. Legos, video games, even our first football game, we were side by side for all of it. As the years passed, nothing really changed, well, except for me. I'd always looked at CJ like he was the best part of my life. But sometime around high school that shifted. I started noticing things about him, things that made my stomach flip, like the way he laughed or how his shirt stretched across his back when he played football. I never said anything, though. He was straight, always dating some girl, but he never held on to any of them for long. I watched it all happen from the sidelines, plastering a smile on my face while my chest burned. 7 years. 7 years of being his best friend, of knowing I was in love with him but never saying a word. "Man, you okay?" CJ asked, snapping me back to reality as we played Call of Duty in our dorm. Yeah, why? I forced a laugh, tossing the controller down as I stretched out on the couch. "You zoned out there? Thought maybe you were getting sick of losing to me," he teased, smirking at me from the other end of the couch. "Please, I let you win," I shot back, grinning, but inside my chest tightened, the familiar ache of wanting something I couldn't have. CJ and I were roommates now, another layer of torture, added to the already complicated mess. Every night I fell asleep across the room from him, and every day I woke up to the same unspoken tension that sat between us. CJ started dating girls seriously in high school. For him, it was just normal girls liked him, and he liked them back. Me? I had to act like it didn't bother me every time he brought someone new into the picture. It became routine. CJ gets a girlfriend, I play the supportive best friend. She fades away, and we go back to our usual thing. I still remember the first time he introduced me to a girl he was dating. "Yo, H. This is Sarah," he said, grinning like an idiot as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Hey," I forced out, smiling. "Nice to meet you." She was pretty, of course, and she liked him, of course. They lasted about 3 months. 3 months of hanging out with them, third-wheeling it, and pretending like it didn't feel like someone was dragging nails down my spine every time they held hands. The worst part was, CJ never even knew. He never noticed that my stomach clenched every time he kissed her, or that I avoided looking at them when they got too close. Why would he? To him, I was just his best friend, nothing more. After Sarah, there was Emily. Then Jessica. Then I lost count. Each time I got better at pretending. "You good, man?" CJ asked one night as we sat on the couch watching some action movie. Emily had just dumped him, and he was surprisingly calm about it. "Yeah, why?" I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the screen. "I done know, you just seem off lately, not your usual self." I turned to him, meeting his eyes for just a second longer than I should have. "I'm fine, CJ. Just tired, I guess." He nodded, but something flickered in his eyes, concern maybe. It was gone just as quickly as it came, and he turned back to the movie. But I knew better. I wasn't fine. I was falling deeper, and watching him go through these girls like it didn't matter, it was eating me alive. I wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that every time he looked at me, I wished he could see me the way I saw him, but I never did. I stayed quiet, kept playing my role. From the sidelines, always from the sidelines. I wasn't sure how much longer I could handle it. It was one of those nights. The kind where the air's thick with sweat and alcohol, and everything feels just a little out of control. CJ and I had been out with friends, bouncing between bars near campus, knocking back drinks like it was nothing. By the time we stumbled back to our dorm, CJ was trashed. I wasn't far behind, but I could still walk straight, mostly. We collapsed on the couch, laughing at something ridiculous from earlier in the night. CJ's head lolled back, his eyes half closed, his voice slurring. "Man, I gotta tell you something," he said, struggling to sit up. "You're not gonna believe this." I grinned, still riding the buzz. "Yeah, hit me." He stared at me for a long second, his face serious in a way that didn't match the drunken haze he was in. "H, I think I've loved you for years." The words didn't hit me at first. I blinked, waiting for him to follow up with a laugh, some kind of joke, but he just kept staring at me. My heart skipped a beat. "What the hell are you talking about, CJ?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. "I'm serious," he muttered, leaning forward, his face inches from mine now. "Since high school. I don't know, man. I've been thinking about it a lot lately and... fuck." The world tilted, not from the alcohol, but from the sudden crash of everything I'd been hiding for years slamming into me. "He can't mean it. He's drunk." "CJ, you're wasted," I managed, trying to laugh it off, but my hands were shaking. I could feel the heat from his body, smell the alcohol on his breath, and all I could think was how badly I wanted to close the gap between us. "I'm not that drunk," he said, his voice quieter now, softer. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing my ear. "I think I've loved you for a long time, man. I just didn't know how to deal with it." My pulse pounded in my ears. This was it. This was everything I had dreamed of hearing for years, but none of it felt real. He was drunk. He had to be. I couldn't let myself believe it, not like this. "CJ, stop," I whispered, pulling back just enough to break the tension. My heart was racing, my body aching with the need to reach out, to kiss him, to let go of all the restraint I'd built up over the years. But I couldn't. Not like this. His face fell confused. What's wrong? You're with Eliza, I said, more to remind myself than to remind him, and you're drunk. You don't know what you're saying. He frowned, looking away. Eliza's not, it's not like that. You're the one I. CJ. Stop, I cut him off again, my voice harsher than I intended. You're not thinking straight. For a moment, the air hung heavy between us. He stared at me, eyes glassy, hurt flashing across his face. Then he slumped back, defeated, the tension breaking. Yeah, maybe, he mumbled, rubbing his hands over his face. Maybe you're right. I stood up quickly, needing space, needing air. My legs felt shaky, my head spinning. Let's get you to bed, man, I said, trying to regain control of the situation and myself. CJ didn't argue. He let me help him up, and I guided him to his bed, his body leaning heavily against mine. As I pulled the blankets over him, he reached out, grabbing my wrist. H, I love you, he whispered again, softer this time, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. I froze for a second, heart pounding, but I forced myself to pull away. Go to sleep, CJ. And with that, he passed out, snoring softly, leaving me standing there, staring down at the one person I'd been in love with for years, wondering if he'd remember any of this in the morning. I doubted it. And yet, for the first time, the words had been said. The unspoken truth had been cracked open, and now I had no idea how to shove it back into the box. The next morning felt like a hangover, even though I wasn't that drunk anymore. I woke up earlier than usual, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. CJ's words from last night kept replaying in my head like a broken record. I love you. I've loved you for years. It was a confession I'd wanted for so long, but I couldn't stop thinking about how drunk he was when he said it. It didn't count, did it? I heard movement on the other side of the room. CJ was stirring in his bed, groaning like a bear coming out of hibernation. Morning, I muttered, my voice still hoarse from the weight of last night. CJ rolled over, squinting at me. God, my head's killing me. What the hell did we even drink last night? He sat up, rubbing his temples, completely oblivious to what had happened. I watched him, waiting for some sign that he remembered. Nothing. Line. You don't remember anything, do you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, confused. What do you mean? Did I do something stupid? Only spill your guts about being in love with me, I thought bitterly, but I forced a shrug. You were just pretty drunk, that's all. CJ grinned lazily, leaning back against his headboard. Well, thanks for not letting me die out there. I probably said some dumb shit, right? My stomach twisted. Yeah, you did, I said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. We fell into an awkward silence after that, and I decided I needed to get out of the dorm. I threw on some clothes and mumbled something about getting breakfast. CJ barely noticed, still nursing his hangover, and I was grateful for the excuse to clear my head. I spent the day trying to forget it all, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter, that it was just alcohol talking. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Every time CJ texted me throughout the day his usual dumb jokes, random comments, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. Later that night, I came back to the dorm. CJ was already there, lounging on the couch, a beer in hand. He waved me over. Come on, sit down. Let's chill for a bit. I hesitated for a second, but then sat down next to him. The tension from the night before still hung in the air, and I could feel it pressing down on me. But CJ acted like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just dropped the biggest bomb on me the night before. So, he started about last night? I froze. He remembers. I just wanted to say, thanks. You always look out for me. He turned to me, his eyes a little softer now, his smile more sincere. I mean it, man. You're always there. Before I could respond, he shifted closer. It wasn't much, just a little move, but suddenly I could feel the heat coming off his body. My heart started pounding again like it did last night. CJ, don't A tried to say, but he was already leaning in, his eyes fixed on mine. My mind screamed at me to stop him, to push him away. But I didn't. His face was so close now, I could smell the beer on his breath, see the way his lips barely parted. For a split second, I wanted to let it happen. I wanted to feel what it would be like to finally kiss him, to have the thing I'd dreamed about for so long. But I couldn't. I pulled back, my breath shaky. CJ, stop. He blinked, surprised, his brow furrowing. What's wrong? You're with Eliza, you can't just... I stammered, my mind racing for the right words. This isn't right. CJ stared at me for a moment, like he was trying to figure me out, then sighed and slumped back into the couch, running a hand through his hair. You're right. Shit, I don't know what I was thinking. I stood up, my heart still pounding. You weren't thinking. Yeah, probably, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't say anything else after that. And neither did I. I went to bed that night, feeling more lost than ever. He'd almost kissed me. Almost. And I almost let him. But almost wasn't good enough. It never had been. And now I didn't know where we stood. The next morning felt like stepping into a minefield. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was going to happen next. CJ was quiet across the room, which only made the tension worse. I wanted to say something, break the silence, but after last night's almost kiss, every word felt like a risk. I rolled out of bed and headed to the kitchen. The smell of coffee hit me before I saw him. CJ was standing there, his back to me, making breakfast like it was any other day. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a cup of coffee without looking up. Thanks, I muttered, taking a sip, trying to read the room. He seemed normal, like nothing happened. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. So about last night, CJ said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was casual, almost too casual. Sorry if I made shit weird. I glanced at him, my heart skipping. Here it comes. He looked up from the stove, meeting my eyes for the first time since the almost kiss. I was drunk and I don't know. I wasn't thinking straight. You were right to stop me. It was like a punch to the gut, but I kept my face neutral. Yeah, no big deal, I said, forcing a shrug. We've all been there. CJ laughed, relieved, right? God, I'm an idiot. I tried to smile, but it felt hollow. This was what I wanted, right? For things to go back to normal. But hearing him brush it off like it meant nothing. I wasn't sure I could handle that either. You don't remember everything, do you? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. But the question hung heavy between us. He frowned, stirring the eggs in the pan. Honestly, not much after we got back here, just flashes. He turned to face me, his expression sheepish. I didn't say anything too embarrassing, did I? I bit the inside of my cheek. Oh, you said plenty. But I wasn't about to dump that on him now. Now I lied, just the usual drunk rambling. Thank God, he said, grinning. I was worried I might have said something I'd regret. The words stung more than they should have. Something you'd regret. The confession, the almost kiss, it was all just drunk nonsense to him, something he needed to forget. And for a second, I thought maybe I should just let it go too, pretend it never happened, and move on. But I couldn't. I leaned against the counter, watching him plate up breakfast. So, Eliza, I started, trying to steer the conversation into safer waters. He looked up, confused. What about her? I mean, you guys are still good, right? I asked, not entirely sure why I was bringing her up now. Maybe I just needed to hear him say it to confirm that everything was as it had always been. CJ hesitated, his expression shifting. Actually, we broke up last week. The words hit me like a sucker punch. What? Why didn't you say anything? He shrugged, looking away. Didn't seem like a big deal. It was coming for a while. We just weren't clicking. I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Eliza was out of the picture. The one thing that made stopping last night easier gone. I wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. So, you're single, I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. CJ nodded, still not looking at me. Yeah, I guess. There was something in his voice, something uncertain, and I realized that for once maybe we weren't as solid as I thought. The cracks were showing, and it scared the hell out of me. Well, breakfast looks good, I said, trying to pull myself together, force the conversation back into neutral territory. CJ laughed, the tension breaking a little. You know I make the best hangover cure. We sat down to eat, the conversation drifting into safer water sports classes, random stuff. But the whole time, my mind kept spinning. Last night's almost kiss, his breakup with Eliza, his drunken confession. None of it felt like nothing. Not to me anyway. And I had no idea what was coming next. The awkwardness from breakfast stuck with me for the rest of the day. I tried to shake it off, but the more I thought about it, the more it nodded to me. CJ had broken up with Eliza and hadn't bothered to tell me. That wasn't like him. We told each other everything, at least that's what I thought. By the time I got back to the dorm that night, CJ was already there, sitting on the couch, beer in hand. He glanced up when I walked in, his eyes lingering on me a little longer than usual before he spoke. Hey, he said, his voice low, almost cautious. Hey, I replied, tossing my bag on the floor and kicking off my shoes. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel it pressing down on me. I had no idea what to say, so I went for the fridge, grabbing a beer and popping it open. We sat there for a few minutes in silence, the TV playing some random show neither of us was watching. Finally, CJ sighed and set his beer down. I've been thinking, he started, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, about last night. About everything. My heart raced. Here we go. I was a mess, he continued, not looking at me. And I'm sorry, I know I said a lot of shit I probably shouldn't have. I don't even remember most of it, but I just want to clear the air. I don't want things to be weird between us. I stared at him, trying to keep my face neutral. I don't want things to be weird. That ship had sailed, but I couldn't tell him that. Not yet. "It's fine, CJ," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You were drunk. We've all been there." He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "No, it's not fine," he said, his tone more serious. I crossed a line. I didn't mean to. "CJ, seriously? It's fine," I interrupted, waving him off. "Let's just forget about it." But he didn't drop it. I don't want to forget it. That's the thing. I feel like I've been holding something back for a while, and he paused, running a hand through his hair. Fuck, I don't know how to explain it. I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse hammering in my chest. "You don't have to explain anything, man," I said, trying to keep it light. "It's all good." CJ stood up suddenly, pacing the room, his frustration obvious. "It's not all good, though. That's the problem. I broke up with Eliza because I couldn't stop thinking about." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes locking on mine. The air felt electric, like we were both on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. My stomach twisted as I realized what he was about to say, but I couldn't bring myself to stop him. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," CJ finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence fell between us. The world seemed to slow down, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. His words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. CJ didn't look away. "I mean, I don't know. This isn't some random thing, H. I've been feeling this for a while, and it's been screwing with my head. Last night I guess it all just came out." My heart raced, torn between relief and fear. He was saying everything I'd wanted to hear for years, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure I could handle it. "CJ," I started, my voice faltering. "This is a lot." "I know," he said, his voice softer now. He took a step closer, his hands shoved in his pockets, uncertainty in his eyes. "But I can't just pretend it's not there anymore." I stood up, needing space, needing air. "You were drunk, man. You said it yourself. Maybe you're just confused." "I wasn't that drunk," he said, his tone firm. "And I'm not confused. I broke up with Eliza because I knew it wasn't fair to her. Not when I was thinking about you." His words hit me like a freight train. All the air left my lungs, and I couldn't figure out what to do with my hands, with myself. "CJ, this is crazy," I said, my voice shaking. "Maybe it is," he admitted, taking another step toward me. "But I don't care anymore. I can't keep pretending I don't feel something for you." I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. I'd waited so long to hear this, and now that it was happening, I didn't know what to say, what to do. The room felt too small, the air too thick. All I could think about was how badly I wanted to believe him. But I didn't trust it. Not yet. "We've been friends for so long," I said, trying to reason with myself as much as with him. What if this screws everything up? CJ's face softened, and for the first time I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't want to lose you either," he said quietly. "But I don't think I can keep going like nothing's changed." His words hung there, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. This was the moment, the crossroads, and I had no idea which way to turn. "I need to think," I finally said, stepping back. "I can't just, this is a lot, CJ." He nodded, understanding. "Yeah, I get it. Take your time." But the problem was, I didn't know how much time I had before this blew up everything we'd built. The next few days were weird. CJ gave me space like I'd asked, but that only left more room for my mind to spiral. I couldn't focus on anything, school, friends, nothing. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed that moment over and over. I couldn't stop thinking about you. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to run back to CJ and say, "Okay, let's figure this out." But the other part, the bigger part, was terrified. What if this wasn't real? What if he changed his mind or realized it was all a mistake? I avoided the dorm as much as possible, not because CJ had done anything wrong, but because I couldn't deal with the confusion bubbling up inside me. One night, after hours of trying to study in the library and failing miserably, I decided to head out, clear my head. I grabbed a coffee to go and started walking, aimlessly wandering campus until I found myself near the courtyard where we usually hung out. And then I saw them. CJ and Eliza. They were sitting together on a bench, her hand resting on his arm, talking quietly. My stomach twisted into knots, and I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell? Oh. CJ had told me they were over, that he broke up with her because of me. But there they were, looking close, too close. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but from the way Eliza was smiling at him, from the way he was leaning in, it didn't look like two people who had broken up. I took a step back, my brain scrambling for answers. Did I misread everything? Was I just a fool? The air felt thick around me, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I wanted to walk over there, demand an explanation, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching them like a complete idiot. Suddenly, CJ looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the courtyard. His expression shifted, guilt flashed across his face, and he quickly pulled his arm away from Eliza, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Hey," he called out, standing up quickly and waving me over. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to walk over, trying to keep my expression neutral. What's going on? I asked, my voice sounding more casual than I felt. Nothing, CJ stammered, glancing nervously at Eliza before turning back to me. We were just talking. Talking, I repeated, my gaze flicking to Eliza, who looked just as confused as I felt. Right? Eliza stood up, giving CJ a weird look. I'm gonna head out. We'll talk later, okay? She said. Her voice clipped as she gave me a quick nod before walking away. I stood there staring after her, my mind racing with a million questions. As soon as she was out of earshot, I turned to CJ. What the hell was that? CJ looked at me, rubbing the back of his neck. It's not what it looks like, H. Well, it looked like you were still with her. I snapped, my anger boiling over before I could stop it. And you told me you broke up with her. Was that just bullshit? He shook his head quickly. No, we did break up. She just wanted to talk. She's been trying to get back together, but I swear, I'm not. Then why were you sitting there with her? I cut him off, my voice rising. It didn't look like you were pushing her away. CJ sighed, stepping closer, lowering his voice. I wasn't trying to lead her on, okay? She just showed up, and I didn't know how to tell her to back off. I've been trying to figure things out with us. Figure things out, I scoffed, shaking my head. This doesn't look like you're figuring things out. This looks like you're keeping your options open. That's not fair, he shot back, his voice tightening. I told you I needed time too. I didn't want to screw things up, but... And why didn't you tell me about this? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. And if you're so serious about figuring things out between us, why are you still hanging out with her? CJ took a step back, frustration flashing in his eyes. I didn't plan on seeing her, okay? It just happened. I stared at him, my anger mixing with hurt in a way I wasn't sure how to handle. You can't have it both ways, CJ. You can't tell me you're confused and then sit here with her like everything's normal. That's not how this works. His face softened, guilt creeping in. You're right, he said quietly. I messed up. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Yeah, well, neither do I muttered, turning away, needing space. Needing to get out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. Each called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I walked away, my head spinning, wondering if this thing between us was already falling apart before it even started. I didn't go back to the dorm that night. I couldn't. I walked around for hours, trying to shake off the anger, but it clung to me, thick and suffocating. Seeing CJ with Eliza, it wasn't just about jealousy. It was the fact that he'd told me one thing and done another. How was I supposed to trust him after that? By the time I finally crashed at a friend's place, it was late. I didn't even bother explaining why I was there, just mumbled something about a long day and passed out on their couch. But even sleep wasn't an escape. My dreams were filled with CJ, his words, his touch, his confession. Everything was tangled up in a mess I couldn't untangle. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My phone was buzzing with messages from CJ. CJ, hey, we need to talk. CJ, please don't ignore me, H. CJ, I'm sorry about last night. Just talk to me. I stared at the texts, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him sweat it out. But the other part, the part that couldn't let go, wanted to see him, to hear him explain himself. I hated how much I cared. So I went back. I dragged myself across campus and up the stairs to our dorm, my heart pounding with every step. I had no idea what I was going to say, no idea what I wanted to hear. All I knew was that this couldn't go on like this. When I opened the door, CJ was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone like it held all the answers. He looked up the second I stepped in, relief washing over his face. Thank God, he muttered, standing up quickly. I thought you weren't coming back. I shrugged, trying to keep my voice steady, had to clear my head. CJ nodded, his eyes scanning my face, trying to gauge where I was at. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet, for everything. I didn't say anything, just crossed my arms and leaned against the wall. I needed to hear him out, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I know I messed up, he continued, stepping closer. I shouldn't have been with Eliza last night, and I shouldn't have kept it from you. I panicked. She showed up, and I didn't know how to handle it. Why didn't you just tell her no, I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. If you're really serious about figuring things out between us, why didn't you shut her down? CJ sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I guess part of me is scared of screwing things up with you. And when she showed up, it was easier to fall into old habits. Old habits, I repeated bitterly, shaking my head. So what? I'm just another option. No, he said quickly, stepping closer, his face earnest. You're not. That's the thing I care about, H. I just don't know how to deal with these feelings. It's not like I've ever done this before. I stared at him, my chest tightening, this meaning feelings for me. He was struggling with it, just like I was, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. Look, I get that this is complicated for you, I said, my voice softening slightly. But if we're going to do this, whatever this is, we need to be honest. You can't keep things from me. You can't be sitting with Eliza, telling her one thing and then telling me another. CJ nodded, his eyes filled with something close to regret. You're right. I don't want to hurt you. That's the last thing I want. Well, you did, I shot back, my anger flaring again, even though I could see the guilt in his eyes. Seeing you with her. It sucked. I know, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down on us. I could see the struggle in CJ's face, the way he was trying to figure this out just like I was, but it didn't make it any easier. So, what now, I asked, finally breaking the silence. Where do we go from here? CJ looked at me, his eyes full of uncertainty. I don't know, he admitted, but I don't want to lose you, H. I don't know what this is supposed to look like, but I want to figure it out. With you. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that he meant it, that this wasn't just some passing phase, but the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. Okay, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but no more bullshit. If we're doing this, we do it right. CJ nodded, relief flooding his face. No more bullshit, I promise. For the first time in days, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And maybe that was enough to hold on to for now. Things between CJ and me settled into this strange new rhythm. But it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. We tiptoed around each other, both of us unsure about what to do next. The tension that had always been there, the unspoken feelings, the stolen glances was out in the open now, and neither of us knew how to handle it, but at least we were trying. About a week later, we were both lying around in the dorm, doing nothing in particular. CJ was on his bed, scrolling through his phone, and I was flipping through channels on the TV, not really paying attention. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't quite relaxed either. Then, out of nowhere, CJ spoke up. We should probably talk. I didn't look away from the TV, but my heart skipped a beat. About what? About us, he said, his voice careful. About what we're doing here? I sighed, tossing the remote aside and sitting up. Yeah, I guess we should. CJ sat up too, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, facing me. He looked nervous, which wasn't something I saw often. Look, I've been thinking about what you said. About being honest, not screwing this up. I nodded, my throat tight. And I don't want to mess this up, he said, running a hand through his hair. But I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I've never done this before, this whole thing with you. I've never looked at a guy like that. Until you. Hearing him say it out loud made my stomach flip. It wasn't the first time he'd hinted at it, but this was different. This was him admitting something real, something that scared him. Yeah, well, you're not exactly making it easy for me either, I said, my voice lighter than I felt. 1 minute you're telling me you've got feelings for me, and the next I see you with Eliza. He winced at that, guilt flickering across his face. I told you that was a mistake. I wasn't thinking. Yeah, you weren't, I agreed, leaning back against the couch, feeling the frustration bubble up again. But this is all new to me too, CJ. I've been in love with you for years, but I've never known what to do about it. Now that you're here saying you feel something too, I'm confused. CJ's eyes softened and he stood up, walking over to me and sitting down on the arm of the couch. I don't want to hurt you. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. What if we mess this up? What if it screws everything between us? I've thought about that too, I admitted, meeting his gaze, but pretending like nothing's changed isn't working either. CJ nodded, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. I get that. It's just scary, you know. I scoffed. Yeah, I know, but we can't keep dancing around this forever. We've been friends for years, but this, whatever this is, has been building for a long time. We either figure it out, or we don't. But I can't handle any more of this back and forth. He was quiet for a long moment, his face serious. You're right. I've been an idiot. I don't want to lose you, but I've been too scared to admit what's really going on. I raised an eyebrow. And what's that? CJ looked me dead in the eye. No hesitation. That I'm into you. That I've been thinking about you in ways I never thought I would. And that scares the shit out of me. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and real. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my heart racing. This was it. This was what I needed to hear. But it was also the most terrifying thing. I've been in love with you for years, I confessed. The words finally slipping out. I've tried to ignore it, bury it, but it's always been there. I didn't think you'd ever feel the same, so I kept it to myself. But now I don't know what the hell to do. CJ leaned closer, his hand brushing against my arm. We'll figure it out. I want to figure it out. But I don't want to rush this. I need time to understand what this means for me, for us. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through me at his touch. Yeah, I get that. He looked relieved, like a weight had lifted off his shoulders. I don't want to mess this up. I really don't. Then don't, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Be honest with me. If you're confused, say it. If you need time, take it. But don't shut me out. Don't go back and forth between me and Eliza or anyone else. I won't do this halfway. CJ nodded, his hand still resting lightly on my arm. I promise. No more bullshit. For a moment we just sat there, the air between us filled with unspoken understanding. It wasn't perfect and there were no easy answers, but we were finally being honest, finally saying the things that had been left unsaid for so long. All right, I said, breaking the silence. Guess we'll see where this goes. CJ smiled, a small, hopeful smile that made my chest tighten. Yeah, we'll see. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe we had a shot at figuring this out, together. Together. It didn't take long for things to change between CJ and me after that conversation. The awkward tension we'd been carrying for weeks started to ease and we fell back into our usual rhythm. But it was different this time. There was something under the surface now, something real. We didn't talk about it constantly, but it was always there. The air between us felt charged, like we were both waiting for something to happen. And then it did. One night, a few days after our talk, we were in the dorm, just hanging out like we always did. CJ was sprawled out on the couch, flipping through channels, and I was sitting on the floor scrolling through my phone, pretending like I wasn't hyper-aware of every single thing he did. Nothing good on CJ, muttered, tossing the remote onto the coffee table. He looked over at me, his eyes lingering. Hey, you good? I glanced up at him, confused. Yeah, why? He shrugged. I don't know. You've been quiet. I hesitated, trying to figure out what to say. The truth was, I had been quiet, because I didn't know how to deal with the way I was feeling. After all these years of hiding my emotions, of being scared to ruin our friendship, everything was out in the open now, and it was terrifying. I'm fine, I said finally, offering a small smile, just thinking. About what he asked, sitting up, his expression more serious than before. I shrugged, avoiding his gaze. Us. CJ didn't say anything at first, and when I finally looked up, he was watching me, his eyes locked on mine. I've been thinking about that too, he admitted, his voice quieter now. My heart raced. Here it is. I didn't know what I expected, but I felt like we were standing on the edge of something. I just didn't know if we were ready to jump. I'd been trying to figure out how to see Jay started, then stopped, like he was searching for the right words. I don't want to screw this up. But I don't want to keep waiting either. I swallowed hard, feeling the tension between us building. So what do we do? CJ stood up, moving slowly like he was giving me a chance to stop him, but I didn't move. He sat down on the floor next to me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. His hand brushed against mine and I could feel my pulse quicken. Do you really want to wait? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I shook my head. No. CJ didn't hesitate this time. He reached out, cupping my face with one hand, pulling me toward him. My breath caught in my throat as his lips met mine, soft at first, almost hesitant, like he was still afraid of crossing that line. But then I kissed him back, all the pent-up emotions from the past 7 years crashing over me in a wave of need and relief. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was desperate, hungry, like we were both trying to make up for all the time we'd wasted pretending this didn't mean. His hand tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and I could feel the weight of everything we hadn't said in the way he kissed me, like this was something we'd both needed for too long. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other. I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, I was speechless. CJ's eyes were wide, his lips parted, still so close to mine. That was... Yeah, I breathed, unable to finish the sentence. It didn't need finishing. We both knew. CJ pulled back just enough to look at me, his hand still resting on the back of my neck. This is real, right? It's not just some, I don't know, fluke. I shook my head, my heart still pounding. It's real. He let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing like he'd been holding tension for years. I didn't know if he'd actually want this. I laughed softly, still in disbelief myself. CJ, I've wanted this for years. I just never thought you'd I know, he cut me off, his thumb brushing against my jaw. I'm sorry I made you wait. I was an idiot. Yeah, you were, I teased, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. But I guess I can forgive you. CJ grinned, his eyes crinkling at the edges. I'll take that. We sat there in silence for a while, just soaking it all in. It wasn't perfect and we still had a lot to figure out, but this moment, this kiss, it was real. For the first time, there were no walls, no unspoken words hanging between us, just us. Does this mean, CJ started, his voice teasing now, I can officially say you're mine? I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help the smile that tugged at my lips. Maybe. CJ laughed, pulling me closer again, his lips brushing against mine, good enough for me. And as we sat there, tangled up in each other, everything finally felt like it was falling into place. Not perfectly, not all at once, but in a way that made me think we had a real shot at figuring this out together. For the first time, I wasn't standing on the sidelines. I was right where I wanted to be,